Hello everybody, welcome back to the series. In this episode, we are going to do a little bit more back-end work before we really sink into the customer part of the application. So it's not going to look terribly different from where we left it last time. In fact, it may be a little bit more sparse, but what I want to do is tie this market item to an item in our Firestore database and fill in these details here with information from a Firestore as well. We will create a customer block so we can start building that out. We will copy the vendor scaffold and rename it the customer scaffold. And by the end, if a market is accepting orders, we'll be able to click on it and go to our customer page, which will just be a copy of our vendor page. And then we can, in the episode after this, start to take the elements on the screen and tune those to be a customer page, which should go fairly quickly because a lot of this we have built and we just need to replace it with customer content from the vendor content. So things should start to go quickly, but we do need to lay some groundwork in this video. And so where I'd like to start is by creating a couple of models in our projects so that we can receive data from the Firestore database on the market with its title and its location. And I'm just going to hand populate the Firestore database. So we're not going to build an interface where we can update the market. That's the market manager portion of the app, and we're going to skip that on this iteration. But we'll just hand populate this data. But to get us started, what I want to do is create a model for a location and then create a model for a market, and the market will have a location object within it, if that makes sense. So let's get started over here in our project in our models folder by creating a new item in the models folder, and I am going to call that location.dart. And so this is just going to be a generic class where we can specify a location. And the properties we want in there, we want a final string, which is name, which would correspond to something like this, St. Jude's Church. We want a final string, which is our address, like that there. And we will want a final string, which is our city, and a final string, which is our state. I'm not going to worry about zip code. And then I'm going to create a final geo point, which I'm not going to populate. Well, I'll populate it today, but I'm not going to actually use it. But this would give us the option if we want to use Google Maps to create directions or show the location of the market on a Google map. I need to import the geo point from Cloud Firestore. And then lastly, a final string and another one I'm not actually going to populate today, but we'll just leave it here as a placeholder. And that is Places ID. So if we get the Google Places ID of the location and we want to store it in there and have a link to that, we can do that as well. All right, so we need a constructor here. And we'll do named properties. And I want to require most of these. So we'll do @required. And we'll need to bring in something that has @required. I'm going to just bring in the foundation. You can use material. That would be fine as well. So we'll do this.name is required. And we'll also do @required for this.address. And we'll do an @required for this.city. And @required for this.state. And if you are not in the US and this scheme doesn't make sense to you, feel free to customize for your locale. Now for the this.geo, I'm not going to require that. And then the this.places ID, I won't require that as well. All right, and so in most of our models, we did a toMap function in here to be able to take a Dart object, turn it into a map. We don't really have use for that right now because we're not going to have a form that pushes this up to Firestore. We're just going to hand fill it out. And so we could put that in there just for future use, or we could just go ahead and skip it for now, which is what I'm going to do. But we do need a way to take the map that we get from Firestore and turn it into a Dart object. So going the other way. So I'm going to do a location dot from Firestore. I'm going to create a map, which is string keys dynamic values, and I will just name that variable Firestore. And so what's going on there? Expected defined. That's just because I'm not done. All right, so let's do name equals Firestore name. So we'll just use the same properties, names in our database and our object. Address will be from Firestore address. And city equals Firestore city. State is Firestore state, nothing surprising there. And for geo, we'll do Firestore geo, and this is capable of taking the geo coordinates and converting it to a geo point. We don't have to specifically cast it to a geo point, so that is fine to just call it like that. But we might not have a value here, and if we don't, I just want to return null. And for places ID, that's going to be Firestore places ID. And same thing here, might not have a value, and I just want to get back null, so I just want to specify that. Follow that up with a semicolon. And let's see, what did I do wrong here? We've got this location from Firestore. Got a map, we've got a string, we've got a dynamic. Yes, that is an errant angle bracket there. All right, so that's all set. So this is going to be an item or an object that we are going to embed in our market object. So we're going to create another model, and we're going to call that market.dart. And it will be a class of market. And so we're going to give the market a title, so that's going to correspond to this up here. We're going to give it a string of date begin. And I'm actually working with some startups here who have different ways of operating, and it's kind of made me realize that either I have my own style or they have their own style, and things are just working differently. But I really prefer to use strings for dates in Firestore, store them in an ISO format, and then you can get them out and easily convert them to a date time in Dart if you need to. I am also going to have a location object, so the location model we just built here. That, and then we'll have a Boolean for accepting orders. Now remember, that is what we use to determine whether we're going to show a shopping cart and say that that market is open. And then the future dates, if they're not open, would just be down here, but you wouldn't be able to click on them and you wouldn't see the shopping basket that orders are opened up. And then finally a string market ID. All right, and so this is another, I need to bring in the location here. This is just another way of doing things that I've noticed. If I have embedded objects in my JSON, I prefer to store them as maps in Firestore, not sub-collections. Sub-collections have their place, but I just find them to be kind of a pain to work with in a situation like this, where you just want to have a sub-object that you can tap into when you go to your market object. So I am just going to use a map in that situation. If it was a sub collection, you have to go back and pull up a second reference just to get that data that goes with it. So if you want that data every time you pull up an object, I find it's better as a map. All right, and for our named constructor, let's require quite a bit of this as well, and we're going to need to bring in material or Cupertino or the foundation.dart library, so I'm going to bring in a foundation. You can do material there as well, it doesn't really matter, just need to get that at required decorator. And so we'll do at required again, and I'm going to require date begin, and I'm going to do at required this dot date end, and at required, layered this dot location, and I am going to require this dot market ID, and this dot accepting orders will not be required, but I am going to set it to false if you don't put anything in there. So I'm going to go ahead and put a default value in the constructor. Similarly, we do not need to do a toMap because we're not going to be creating a form just yet. We would if we needed to at a later date. So I'm just going to do a function that will take it from a map to a Dart object. So we'll do the market.from Firestore, and we'll put a map in here. We'll do string key, we'll do dynamic values, and we'll call it Firestore just like we did before. And plenty of practice with this. All right, so then we just need to go through each one of our properties. So we've got title, and that will be Firestore title. And again, this is just kind of perfunctory here. You could use this mapping to have different cases or different naming conventions in your database versus your Dart object if you wanted to, but we are going to keep our casing and our spelling and everything the same in Firestore and our object. All right, and a location, we're going to need to cast that to a location. So we can do location from Firestore, and then we can go in and get our Firestore location like that. Market ID, we're just back, that's just a string. And lastly, we will have accepting orders. All right, just take a look up and down, make sure you got your spelling correctly. Accepting orders can be omitted, but we don't need to cover that scenario like we did with location because we have set a default value. All right, so since we now have our model and theoretically could write a service to pull a market with its location out of the database, let's put one in the database. And so I have already put a market out there, but let me walk through doing another one with you. And I'm just gonna keep the model up here so I can see it. And this doesn't need to be anywhere near that big. All right, so first of all, I've created a collection called markets. Right here. So I'm going to add another document. I added one already. But for a document ID, I'm just going to hit auto ID. That's fine with me. And then I want to create a market ID of that auto ID. That's just so I can quickly reference it. All right, so I've got my market ID. I also want to have a title. Can be whatever you want, but that's what's going to get displayed in the market title. Date begin. So here's where I want to get an ISO string. So I'm going to go to greenwichmeantime.com/articles/clock/ISO. Wherever you have an ISO string, you can grab it. You can create one with Dart or JavaScript or whatever you want. But I'm just looking for any old one. So I'm going to plop it in here. And this is just now, basically. I'm going to follow it up with a Z. I'm going to take out all the decimal places because I don't need to be that precise. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm going to put a 0 in there. And I'm In fact, I'm going to round that off to 0. I'm going to round the hour off to 0. And I'm going to set it a month ahead so that if we look at markets in the future that we have some room here. In fact, maybe I'll set it 2 months ahead, October 3rd. And I think it's about 11 in the morning here, so I'm going to set it back 2 hours so it represents about 9 o'clock in the morning. All right, I think I got one there. Hardest thing we'll do all day. And then I'm going to do date end, and I'm just going to copy above, and I'm just going to add 6 hours to it as a closing time for the market. All right, and then the last one easy one we've got here is accepting orders, and it should be capital. That's a Boolean, and for that one I'm going to say false. Actually, I'm going to say true because you're doing a first one here, and you want at least one you can click on, so I'll say true. And then we want our location field, so I'm going to hit add. I am going to put location. I'm going to change the type to a map. And inside of that map, we're going to create a location object. So I will click on my location model just to make sure I have all the fields I need there. And so I've got name, and we'll say the location is called John's Market. Or let's just say the school. Let's just do that. All right, and the address is going to be whatever you want it to be. I'm just going to do 1 Main Street. City, that will be, let's just say Athens. And the state. And I should not be capitalizing those if you caught that. Lowercase, lowercase. And let's do Georgia. All right, and then I need I'm going to not do the places field. I think I'm going to skip geo for now, so I won't do any geo either. So we'll just save that. All right, so that should give us a market to pull, and we have a model to load that value into. So we need a service to go and get it. So let's go to our Firestore service here. Get rid of the Chrome window. And let's slide on down to the bottom here, and that's going to be a stream, and the stream is going to be a list of markets. So we'll do list market, and we'll call it fetch upcoming markets. So I'm going to do a query on one of the date fields and make sure that these markets have not already happened. So we'll bring in market. And I'll want to return DB. Oop, no space there. And we'll do .collection, and the collection will be markets. It's the one we just created. And we want to do a where clause, and so the field that I want to do the where clause on is date end. And so if it's the day of the market and it's going on, I don't want it to disappear, but as soon as the market's over, we'll have it disappear. And we'll do greater than, and I think I mentioned before when you do a where clause, IntelliSense takes a little while to catch up. It's like after you've already done it, and it's not even there then yet. But is greater than, and we can do datetime.now, and then there's this handy little function here, which is to ISO 8601 string. And so if we cast it to that, we can do a direct comparison to ours, which is a string, and you can compare dates, which is nice. All right, so we want snapshots, so we get a stream. And then we're going to need to do some mapping. So first we want to map our query. And we're going to map that to query.documents. So that'll get us an iteration on our documents. And then for each one of those, we'll want to do map. We'll call it a snapshot. And we want to do snapshot.map. We want to map each one of those, and that's our document. And we're going to send it over here and get document.data, and we're going to want to cast that to a market. So let's do our market dot from Firestore that we built, and we can pass that document.data. I'm going to just wrap that around. All right. So that is not returning a list. So I'm going to come down here to the next line and just do to list. So make sure you're inside of that last parenthesis. So one of the parentheses that was still there, you come inside of that, you do dot to list, and that will cast it to a streaming list of our markets. Excellent. So now we should be able to call that on our screen. This is still showing my source code. So when I added it, it shows up here. Let me get that out of here. Let me stop that. I guess I don't need to stop it. Or I do need to stop it. I didn't need to move it off the screen to do it. Start debugging. Here we go. I did change my market pick. I decided I didn't like the one that was there, and I replaced it with green beans. That's the difference between last time and this time. All right, so while that fires up, the next thing we need to do is we're going to need a block. So we've got our Firestore service. We have data out there. We have models that hopefully will match the data when we pull it in from Firestore if we've done everything correctly. And so we just need to access it on the landing page where we have hard-coded these app list tiles. We now want to do a list view builder and a stream builder and populate these app list tiles with the data from the database. Now, every other time we have interacted with the database, we have done it through a block. And we want to do that here. And we actually want to start a new block because there are new operations that we're really going to want to associate with a customer. We will almost certainly be working with the product block in our customer user face to show them the products that are available to them and to put them in the cart and all that stuff. But we do want another block just to organize operations around the customer because the product block is starting to get, somewhat large. And the nice thing about blocks is you can organize them any way that makes sense to you. So I'm going to create a new block called the customer block.dart. And we'll call that class customer block. And we don't actually have any call for using any streams just yet, but this is where we have forwarded our streams from our Firestore service. And so we're going to do that here. So we do want an instance of our Firestore service. So we'll do a final DB, and that will be our Firestore service. And we're going to want a getter section, and our first getter is going to be a stream, which is a list of market. Import that. Make sure you get 2 closing braces there, and that will be a getter. And we'll just call that fetch upcoming markets. And we will pass that our DB fetch upcoming markets. So we're just forwarding to the Firestore service and allowing the user interface to interact through the customer block and not have to call an instance of the Firestore service itself. While we're in here, let's just create a dispose method, which we don't have anything to put it in there yet, but we are going to want to dispose streams here in the customer block. So we'll build that so that when we go to wrap it in our main app, that we can then call the dispose function there. And anytime we put something in our dispose method, we know that it will get called when this customer block is disposed. All right, so that's all we need to do in our customer block for today. To hook this customer block up to our widget tree, we do need to visit app.dart. Way back here, almost in the root of our application. I think it's actually inside SRC. And it is right there. All right, so up near the top in our build, we have providers for all of our blocks that we have put into the widget tree so far, our auth block, our product block, and we're just going to add the customer block to the list. So we'll create a variable called customer block, and that will be equal to a new instance of our customer block. And then we'll just come down here and create a provider. We'll do create, we'll do context, we'll do a fat arrow, and we will pass it our customer block instance. Make sure we get a comma there. Now remember, we called, instead of just creating the new instance here, we created a variable up here attached to a new instance so that in our dispose method, we can call customer block.dispose. And so when the app widget is disposed, it is also going to call the dispose method on all of these blocks, and we will be killing all our streams there so we do not have memory leaks. All right, so now we're 25 plus minutes into this video and we don't have a darn thing to show for it on the screen. So let's do something that will show on the screen. So let's go to screens and landing, and let's take out the placeholder. So yeah, let's go backwards a little bit. Actually, why don't you take out the entire children section of list view. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to go all the way down to these placeholders I put and to this bracket for widgets. And I'm going to convert this to a list view builder. And what I want to do is I want to pull in those markets, and so that will be done through our customer block. So let's slide up to the top here. I'm just going to remove these two imports because they're not being used. Everything's in our page body, and we have our build here with our scaffold. So let's come inside our build and let's create a variable called customer block. And we'll set that, to provider.of. Let me import provider of a context, and we will specify that the widget we're looking for is a customer block. And we will import that as well. All right, so we have that there. Let's add that as a pass-through in our page body function. And just add it to each one of these page bodies. All right, so then in list view builder here, I hit save, so that's going to give me an error. I didn't mean to do that. We'll fix it. Our item count. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's take the list view and let's wrap it in a stream builder so that we have a stream to work off of. So I'm just going to click on that. I am going to wrap with stream builder like that, and the object we'll be working with is a list of market. And we need two closing angle brackets. We need to import market. Stream is going to be customer block.fetch upcoming markets. And if we have no data yet and we want to give it some time to get the markets, let's set ourselves up a spinner. So if not snapshot has data, let's return a center widget with a child, and the child will depend on platform.isIOS. And if it is iOS, we'll do a Cupertino activity indicator. Otherwise, we will return a circular progress indicator, like that. Let me wrap that around a little bit. There we go. So this is if our snapshot has no data, we're going to return a center. We're going to return Cupertino circular progress. And if it has data, we're going to come down here to the list view builder, and our item count is going to be equal to our snapshot.data.length, and our item builder will be built off of, we'll do build context and an integer of index, and then we'll open up some curly braces, and this is where our iterative object build will happen. And so we will return an app list tile. That's what we had before. Did I remove the import? Yeah. Okay. I removed that unused import because I deleted them all. All right. So I'll bring it back in. And so the properties that we need here, if I hit Control Space on my Mac, I get date. And so for a date, we actually just want the number of the date. And then we also have a month property. And that was going to fill out the little bubble with the little month at the top in 3 letters, and then the date in larger numbers down below. To format the date, I want to use a package. It's one I've liked all along for this, and it's called date_format. And it's really simple. You just format date, you give it the date, and then you give it an array with the format that you want. So there's not a lot of explanation here on what these HHNN, all this stuff means, but this is pretty standard stuff, and you can kind of play around with it. But basically, we'll just take the year. It will concatenate everything together in the array. So if you wanted to put a dash between the year, the month, and the date, you do it like this. Really simple and works really well. So I'm going to grab the dependency for that. I'm going to put it in my pubspec.yaml, and I can guarantee you this will not work unless you restart the application. I know that for a fact. So I'm going to stop it, and I am going to restart it. In fact, I better get rid of my error before I restart. So let's just return an empty container and a landing, and then I will be able to restart it. There we go. All right, I'll see you when that fires up. All right, so there it is. We have even less than when we began with, which is kind of sad, but we're getting there. All right, so I'm going to replace this container here with a app list tile again. All right, and for the month, let's go ahead and do our format date, which is our package. I think I need to bring that in. Yep. All right, and for my date, you know what? It's I'm going to take a shortcut up here, and rather than do snapshot.data index dot, I'm just going to create a market variable, and I'll load that up with snapshot.data index, and then for the end date, we'll do snapshot.data. Well, actually, sorry, we can just do market.dateEnd. There we go. So I'm going to have to pass this date into formatting, and whoops, I mean to actually cast that to a date. So let's do date time dot parse, and then pass market.dateEnd like that. So we want a date object so I can format it. And like I said, with the ISO string format, it's so easy. Just take that out as a string, a Firestore, do datetime.parse and you're in business. And then if I need to put it into any other format like this where I just want the month, I can do that with the format date package. All right, so I'm going to pass it date end here, and then I just need to give it an array with my format string, and I just want the month, and I will get the short month like that. All right, and then the same thing for the date. Just paste that in there, take out the extra comma. Whoop. And the comma I need apparently, and then I'll just do D in there. And for the title, I'm going to do market title. And then for location, so this is just a string location. So let me create a string here and let me interpolate the market.location.name. So that would be like the school or the church. And then I'll do a comma and I'll interpolate market.location.address. And then I'll do a comma and then I'll interpolate again. Oop, I don't need to do that. This there. I guess I need to keep that all in one line. That would be, let me close the bracket, market.location.city and comma, one more string interpolation. We'll do market.location.state. Wonderful. All right, we hit save there, and we see I've got Anytown Farmers Market, which I entered before, and then we just entered together this Anywhere Farmers Market there. We don't actually have anything on the baskets there, so let's do accepting orders as well, and we'll set that to market.acceptingorders. And there we go. All right, so lastly, I want to be able to click on this. I want to go to the customer page. I want that customer page, though, to basically be for that particular market that I'm at here. That's what I want to see my shopping cart for, any orders that I'm waiting for. It would be on the market that I click on. And so when I click on a list, an item in this list, and we go to a customer page, I want it to be for the market, and so I need to identify what I'm seeking in that route. And so the market ID would be the way to do that. And so I actually want to be able to pass the market ID to the on-click listener of the list tile. And so we don't actually have an on-click listener for a list tile yet. And we also want to be able to accept the market ID. So let's address both of those in our widgets folder. We'll go to widgets. We will go to our list tile. And so let's first of all make sure that we can accept the market ID. Like that. And you know what? Let's make it required. And then let's come down here to our list tile. And so we've got this trailing, and we are checking to make sure that we are accepting orders, and we are not showing the basket if we are not. If we're accepting orders, we also want to make it so that you can tap on the tile and have it go somewhere. So let's add a new property down here. We'll do on tap, and we will first check if we are accepting orders. And if we are, we'll do a generic function. So we'll do parentheses, arrow, and we will do navigator of context and push named. But not so fast. We don't have a root name yet. So let's leave that blank. And then let's say, though, if we're not accepting orders, let's just return null. And so that will stop the tile from being clickable. Our root name, which we haven't set up yet, but let's go ahead and just know that we probably want to go to /customer/market ID. So we're going to want to take the market ID that we get passed in, and we're going to want to navigate to /customer/market ID. And again, if we're not accepting orders, we're just going to return null, and that will not be clickable. All right, so I think we're set there. We did break the landing page, so let's go back to the landing page, and we are now requiring a market ID. So let's just add that, and we can get that off of market ID. All right, so we need a route. We also need a destination to land on, which we don't actually have yet. And to make it real easy on ourselves, let's just go to screens and let's right-click on our vendor. Let's copy, and let's just paste that into screens and rename it customer.dart. All right, so we can come in here. I'm going to do Command D and not hit that key. Just going to do Command D and start highlighting all of these vendors and change them to customer. And I just have one error here. This is going to also, we want let's see, tab bar is going to be customer and customer tab bar, which we don't have yet, so we will get an error on that. Check that again. Customer, let's see what we got here for options. Okay, let's come up here to tab bar. So the get customer tab bar, because we did a full replace, that ended up with a capital, so we want to just change that to lowercase, and then come down here and make sure this is lowercase as well. That'll fix that. All right, also I just want to take these two navbar titles and change them from vendor to customer. That way, if we go on this page, it will look just like our vendor page. The only difference will be it will say customer name at the top instead of vendor name, and that's how we'll know that we're there. Okay, I'm just taking a look here. I also see vendor scaffold here. So I'm going to go to widgets, vendor scaffold, and I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to paste that as well. And we're going to create a customer scaffold. So I'll rename that customer scaffold, get rid of that copy. Right. And I don't think a full replace is needed. I think we just need to replace vendor up here with customer. And that's going to do it. So then let's go right back where we were into our screens customer and just change that vendor scaffold to a customer scaffold, which we'll need to import. And then it's also in the material. No, actually it's not. It's just an iOS thing. So we've just got the customer scaffold here in the iOS to replace, and everything else I think we're okay for now. All right, so on this page, I do want this to be able to take in a market ID. So let's come up to the top and let's do a final market ID, which is a string. And so this will have a constructor. That's capital, gosh. Trying to bounce back and forth between C# and Dart. Customer. And we'll do named. And we'll do this dot market ID. And let's go ahead and make it at required. All right, so now lastly, we can go to our roots. And we can create ourselves a root down here in our root array. So if we start with the material page routes, we can just copy this and we can come right here, paste it in. And instead of if, I'm going to do else if. You could just do chaining ifs together, but let's just be consistent about it. And we're going to say customer here. And when we navigate, we are going to navigate to customer. And instead of product ID, we're going to have market ID. And I'm actually going to copy that. Going to take it down here, and I'm going to paste it right below down in the Cupertino roots. And the only thing I need to do is change this to Cupertino page route. And we should be good to go. All right, folks, so if we come back here and we're on our list view and we click on it, we are brought to what looks an awful lot like our vendor page and is, but we know that it is our new copied copy of the vendor page, which we have renamed customer page. And we know that because we can see customer name here at the top. Whew. All right, folks, so that was a rough one, but we did quite a bit behind the scenes here. We've really set ourselves up for success. So when we come back here in the next video, we're just going to be able to start ripping this out whole stock and create a customer experience, create 3 or 2 or whatever we decide for our tabs that have applicable icons up here. We can get rid of this plus button. We can get rid of these cards and come up with cards that are more indicative of a shopping experience. So that'll be next time on the series. Thanks as always for watching, and we will see you then.